Hi, my name is Nicole Golden, and I'm the host of the Mental Health Matters podcast. Today, I'm interviewing my friend Heather Palacios, who uses her social media accounts to raise awareness for mental health. She and I have some similar stories and struggles, and I know you're going to absolutely love her. If you like this podcast, would you hit the share button or the subscribe button if you haven't already? I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hey everybody, welcome in. I am super excited about today's interview. I know that we've hit you with the trigger warnings from start to finish with this, but this is just one more reminder that Heather and I are going to be talking mainly about the topic of suicide for the next few minutes. So this is my friend Heather. Heather and I I've known Heather for longer than she's known me. So I've been quietly stalking and following her for probably 8 to 10 years. But then she and I connected a couple years ago. She was on my podcast a couple years ago. And then as we were talking about what we wanted to cover in these podcasts, I was like, I have to get her back on. So we'll share her handle, but on social media, it's Wond, W-O-N-D, her, H-E-R, full. And she does a ton of work with suicide awareness. But I'm going to shut up here in a second and let her share her story and why suicide awareness, suicide prevention is such a massive thing for her, to the point where she created these life boxes that if someone has walked through a loss due to suicide or is contemplating suicide, if you message her via her website, she will send you a free box that includes, I have one of the bracelets on, Bibles, devotionals, really practical things. I've given these boxes out a couple of different times. But I'm going to be quiet now, Heather, and I want you to share a little bit about your story, why this is such an important topic to you, and then we'll go on from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, have fun with that loaded question.
But maybe I was stalking you 15 years. So that means I've known you longer.
Okay, you win that one.
On the stalking meter.
Yeah.
So I'm 50 and I started struggling with suicide at 8 years old, Nicole. And that was long before there was podcasts, movements, coalitions, legislature, organizations, wristbands, semicolon tats.
Yeah.
And so at 8 years old, I didn't want to live anymore, and my parents just called the local church. I mean, that's, they did the best they could with what they had, and I applaud them for that. And that kind of set me on a trajectory that would end up being up to date as recently as the last year, where that's just been my thorn in my side. And it's not been easy, but nobody's life is easy. We all struggle with something, and mine has been suicide. But I've struggled with suicide now every stage of a person's life. I've struggled with it as a child, as a teenager, as a college student, as a young career, as a spouse, as a parent, in a pandemic.
Yep.
And most recently, with sudden unexpected grief. So it's run the gamut, but I'm still here. And so, I'm just really on a mission to help others be here too, because I know what it's like now to want to die.
Yeah.
And know what it's like to get to live.
Yeah.
And so I don't have the answers, but I have found the answers with God. And so I boxed that up, and it's called a life box. And for the last 3 years, we've been shipping life boxes to anybody, anywhere, going through anything. Because I believe for myself and everybody that one more suicide is one too many. And so in the last 3 years, we've done like 15,900 life boxes.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, to all 50 states, 14 countries. And we're not looking to be a business. It's not a business that you're like, woo, we reached our goal, but nor has God closed the door.
Yeah.
As long as we get requests, we're going to honor those because we want those people to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
It started off as pandemic life boxes where it was mainly going to people that wanted to give up due to the pandemic.
Mm.
Now we're doing life boxes for a myriad of reasons, because people give up for a myriad of reasons.
Yeah.
So we have teachers that have survived school shootings. We have military bases. We have cancer patients. We have Jamaica high school students that are cutting. We have people that are struggling with their sexuality. I mean, we have every kind of thing, because people give up for every single reason.
Right.
And I don't want them to die. So we give them a life box,
Yeah.
and a life box can't save people. But the things that are in that life box, God has used to save me. So
I love
we
that.
We send them for free.
I love that. Well, and if someone's listening right now and they're like, how do I get one? They just go to your website, correct? And they can request one. And I love, because she'll send them to people who are walking through whether or not they want to live. Then she'll send them to parents, siblings, friends who are surviving someone's loss by suicide. And I love what you said. Andy Stanley, he's one of my favorite people. He talks about how we can't necessarily fill somebody else's cup up, but we can empty ours, right? So you're like, I have my cup. I have everything that I've learned that's helped keep me alive. And I'm just going to pour that out and give you what I've got. And then, trust God to do the rest. And I love that. Yeah.
Which is kind of a conundrum, because I'm pouring from my own battle. I mean, I take medicine, I get counseling. I follow a pretty strict protocol for my battle. It's like there's like 6 things that I do that I have to do. Yeah. Just to keep going. And so, and not to diminish anybody else's battle, but this is not the, I'm a survivor of a disease from my childhood. The struggle is real for me, so I have to be careful.
And I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but I think that, I was just talking to somebody yesterday, and, they were saying that they've had this lifelong battle with mental health, and they were like, I have prayed so many times, God won't remove it, I'm tired, what do I do, and I just talked to her from my perspective of like, listen, like I've had a mental health issue for the majority of my life. I too was in a season where I was trying and begging God to remove it. He didn't. And I really felt like he spoke to me through Paul's message. And you kind of alluded to it about the thorn in the flesh, and how I had heard that explained as though Paul's thorn in the flesh was something emotional. Because we forget, like the people Paul traveled and visited during all his missionary journeys, these are families he destroyed. Like imprisoning people, killing people. So he was constantly reminded of his past. And I just told her, I was like, there's power in those of our stories where God hasn't intervened necessarily and taken away, but where he's intervened in my grace is sufficient for you. And that's a battle. And I think for you, what you just said is you have to be careful. You have certain things in place that allow you to rely on God's grace. It's not like you're just like, well, God's grace is sufficient for me, so I'm just going to do whatever, however. So what are some of those things that you've put into place so that as you, because I mean, you go into prisons, you go to psych wards, you are in and out of so much that could be triggering for people like us, that could bring things up. So what are some of the protocol, do you mind sharing, that you have in place to protect you?
Yeah, great question. So I follow kind of this formula of medication, which is controversial, and that's a whole nother podcast, but I take medicine.
Me too. Same girl.
I get counseling from a Christian psychologist. I read my Bible and journal. Journaling's been huge for me. I go to church weekly. And I drag myself there sometimes, but it's a non-negotiable. Yeah. And again, that's a whole nother podcast, the science and the spiritual advantages of actually being in a church for an hour on Sunday for someone like me. And I have outdoor activity. Okay. I know my worth and I have boundaries.
I love that.
So that's kind of the script that I'm sticking to because I'm alive.
Yeah.
And it's working.
Yeah. And you have 2, now I've kind of lost track, but 2 at least teenage boys. Has one graduated from high school?
I have one they both have graduated high school now.
Okay.
And
geez.
so they're both in their college years. And then we have 2 golden doodles.
2 fur babies. So how much have you shared with your sons about your struggle? I mean, obviously they know you have this massive ministry. Mm-hmm. How much detail do you go into with them? Have you gone into what?
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm glad you asked it because that's important. And now that I'm now that I'm 50, I really do like to educate young moms, parents on that kind of a thing, because I do think you need to be careful.
Yeah.
I love it when mom podcasts have me on because I'm like, listen to me.
Yeah.
Don't screw this up.
Yeah.
Because they can't handle it.
Yeah.
All right. Let the record show that DJ and Andy, for a good majority of their life, did not know the struggle. So the timeouts that I needed to take mentally were, mommy's going to go take a nap. Mm-hmm. Mommy had to go away for a few days to get some R&R. We didn't lie, but we did not divulge the details. They're too young.
They can't handle that. Yeah.
They can't handle that.
Yeah.
When they were around between the ages of like 10 and 13, we allowed them to hear the story in church as I told it from the stage with my husband with them.
Yeah.
That way they were in a large group and not feeling like they were like had the spotlight on them.
Yeah.
But they had my husband with them. And they were able to just kind of absorb it, hear it the way everybody else, the general public was. And then because we went home afterwards, they were able to kind of dissect that with me. One of them was tearful and one of them was like, So, and then from there on out, they knew this is a mission for my mom and this is her struggle. So I really try to encourage people that you do not need to vomit your drama on your kids.
Yeah.
They can't handle it. And I do think you could cause some damage.
Yeah. And I think, so my kids know Brooke, and she is totally fine with me sharing this because we've talked about it numerous times, but went through a struggle about 1.5 years ago where the anxiety for her just got overwhelming due to some bullying at school. And she was probably about 10 years old, started sharing some of my struggles with her because it gave us an opportunity to connect in that way, and then also open the door for me to be like, hey, I've been there. Let mommy walk this road with you because I've learned some things, but I waited all the way up. And then I did not, we're going to, if you're willing, talk about your brother in just a second, because you and I have, unfortunately, common ground with our brothers, but I didn't start sharing with her anything about how Eric died or any of his struggles until the past year. She's getting ready to go into middle school. And so there were certain things that I wanted to just like, hey, we need to be aware of some of these things. We need to start having some of these conversations, but never in detail. So I think I love that you shared that with your husband. And I love the things you share on social media about your husband. It's so funny. She's so real, you guys. You need to follow her. But when we did Scar Stories a couple years ago, you shared during the pandemic was another season where it was real dark for you. And there was a moment where you had to text your husband and say like, hey, come get me because this is not good. So has he gone through, what has he done to be able to walk this road with you? Because does he have any concept of, was mental illness ever a part of his mental health stuff, ever a part of his life or walk? And so then he marries you, and so what
and
has
it's like cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, surprise!
Oh, I feel like the same with Bryant. He's like, I have no context for any of this, and I was like, you're welcome, So Bryant's done therapy for me,
Right.
Right. So what is
that's part of like the diatribe that Raul and I have when we speak to people is, it's one thing to be crazy, it's another to be married to it. And so, especially if you're bamboozled. I mean, when he said I do, I was like, come again, one more time. He said I do. I'm like, okay, now you're really gonna hear about crazy.
So he didn't know about a lot of it. Oh wow.
No.
Look at you.
No.
I love it.
I kept the beast hidden until I heard I do, and then I was like, oh boy. Homeboy gonna regret.
I mean, we're not
those two-
saying that you should do that. I kind of did the
no,
same.
I don't recommend that.
Yeah, I
No,
did
no,
similar
no.
with Bryant. So we're not saying that that's what you should do. We're just saying that's what happened. But what has he done then to just kind of prepare himself?
Two things. To echo what you said, he's gotten counseling himself because, I mean, if I had gotten in a car accident at the beginning of our marriage and had become a quadriplegic and was rendered to a wheelchair for the rest of my life, he would need to talk to an expert on how to do life with somebody in a wheelchair because he's not an expert.
Yeah.
Well, he married somebody whose brain is in a wheelchair, and he's not an expert on that, but a psychologist is.
Yep.
So he has gone and met with one for his sake, so he knows how to be married to somebody whose brain is proverbially in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
The other thing he has done is he has had a boundary, and his boundary is very simple, in that it's my job to love Heather and it's God's job to save Heather. There's been probably half a dozen times where he has come home and not known if I was going to be dead or alive. A couple of times where he's had to keep the kids in the car. And I'm not proud of that. But I do know that he would not have given up his life for the rest of his life if he would have discovered that I was no longer here. It's his job to love me, and he has.
Yeah.
It is not his job to save me.
Yeah.
And I really say that a lot because I think for the people that are sacrificing their lives to save somebody else, it could be liberating for them. But there's also a lot of people that are sacrificing their lives because somebody did die.
Yeah.
And they've just given up their life because they couldn't save them. And I just think that's so sad.
Yeah. Yeah. And you and I both walked through, so my brother passed, what's today, 5 years ago in January. And then your brother passed, was it 2 years ago?
Year and a half ago.
Year and a half ago.
And I'm really struggling. So this is a tough one for me.
Would you rather, and you want to pass it?
I'll talk about it.
Okay.
I'll talk about it, but I'm having a tough time.
Okay. And just so you guys know, we prayed ahead of this because talking about someone that you've lost to suicide is incredibly triggering. And one of the things that I wanted us to talk about, because I think it's important, is the survivor's guilt. So I know when Eric died by suicide, for me, I had a season where I thought it should have been me. And there was a part of me that wished it had been me and not him. And I had to wrestle through accepting the fact that I had gotten healthy and he didn't. And that was, I'm not going to say okay, but I didn't need to feel bad about the fact that I had gotten healthy. I didn't need to feel bad about the fact that I was still living, but I really struggled with that. And then also I remember that fall leading up, and you guys can go back. I did a podcast with Megan. We dropped a couple of weeks ago where we talked about boundaries, but where I had to sit with my therapist, Kevin, because it was almost like I knew it was coming. God had started, and it was weird, but I remember that fall telling Bryant, I'd had several friends lose siblings due to overdose, things like that. And Eric was struggling with an opioid addiction. And I remember telling Bryant, we're next. And so I remember sitting in therapy crying and saying to Kevin, you know, he's calling me at all hours. It's disrupting my family. I can't carry, you know, I'm having people tell me that I'm keeping my brother alive. Kind of goes back to what you just said. And I was carrying the weight of that. And he started encouraging me to set up boundaries. I did. But then with that came the guilt of, I asked Kevin numerous times, what if he takes his life? What if he takes his life? What if he takes his life? Right. And for a good several months, and even it'll hit me at weird times where I will just have these moments of, I should have done more. I could have done more. Yeah. Why did I not step in? Why didn't I, why I thought I should have done this, but I didn't. So I'm sure you felt all the same things. Yeah. How have you walked through dealing with all of that? Because I just kind of crawled my way out, but
it's been a nightmare. I mean, to have an organization where, you know, you're championing living, as opposed to giving up, and then, you know, to have your brother give up. I feel like it's been my biggest test. I've never, you know, in all my temptations to want to take my life, have been more ready to than this last year and a half. Grief has been my biggest test, more than a pandemic, more than bullying, more than addiction, more than trauma. Oh my gosh, it's just, I had no idea. I had no idea. It's like grief is, you know, I tell people grief is a companion you never asked for, who will never leave you.
Yeah. It's not funny, but I don't know what else to do except burst into tears or, you know. Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah.
What, I didn't invite you?
Yeah.
But you won't go away. You're with me when I'm in my closet. You're with me in my car. You're with me in the shower. You're with me in my bed.
Yeah.
You know, and I didn't ask for you. And you're there more than my husband. You're there more than my dog, my kids. You know.
Yeah.
And yeah, and this just wasn't supposed to be this way.
No.
Chris is my youngest brother. I have 3 brothers, and I definitely was supposed to die before him. By sheer number alone. I'm 50. He's 10 years younger than me.
Yeah. Have you upped, like, for me, I had to up my counseling, my therapy during that season. It was funny because I had to tell certain friends there were times where I could be present and I could be around, and then there were other times where I just didn't even have the emotional margin. And so I would have to let people know, like, if I go silent, I need you to check on me, but I also need you to not force me to exert emotionally, because I just cannot.
I feel like I have definitely run out of my grief passes with people.
Can you expound on what you mean by that? Because I think people need to hear this.
I feel like I've run out of my grief passes. I think you get grief passes with people, and the closer they are to you, the more grief passes you get with them. So a husband, you're going to probably get, 20 grief passes. A pastor, you might get, a couple, and a best friend, you might get 10, but I think I run out of them with everybody, which depresses me, because I'm like, well, now who do I have? Who do you do? And that being said, I still can't see that as a license to give up. I still can't let the devil get in my head and say, now you have no one, so this would probably be a good time for you to exit too. I have to go to the Bible. And I'm like trolling the Bible, trying to find, because if I can find it in the Bible, then I got to keep going.
Yeah.
That's always been how I've been since I was 8 years old. I have my 8-year-old Bible and every Bible since then. Because if I can find it in the Bible, I have no excuse.
Yeah.
The devil can't win. And it's funny because that's just really been wreaking hell on me right now, is that I've run out of grief passes with everybody. And maybe I have, or maybe I haven't. But Jesus was on the edge of a cliff, or on top of a building, on top of the temple, and had nobody, and was being tempted to jump. And it was so daunting, and it was so agonizing for him. And he had nobody. He had no encouragement passes with anybody. He was alone. And the angels came and tended to him afterwards. And so I'm going to trust Jesus at his word, that even if I have nobody, I can ask for some angels to come tend to me.
Yeah. I mean, that's so powerful. We forget when Jesus went into the wilderness for those 40 days, 40 nights. He was hungry. He was tired. And he knew what was coming. He knew the cross was coming. He was aware of all that.
Right.
And to be tempted those 3 times to pass by all of that, to avert that. And yet he did it anyways. And then I think when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, he, in his humanity, he didn't want to die, crying and begging God to take that from him, to the point where he's excreting drops of blood. I mean, he understands agony.
And he run out of his passes with his friends there.
Well, that's the thing. I've never thought of that. Yeah.
They were all taking a Cuban siesta. And
her husband's Cuban, just in case some of you are like, what is happening?
Yeah. They had just had some arroz con pollo. And they were all taking a siesta. And again, though, even in that exquisite agony, he had the Father. And I've always, of course, memorized the verse in John where Jesus said, I am not alone, my Father is with me. And so maybe, I have, carnally speaking, run out of grief passes with people on earth, but I have God and I have his angels and I've got eternal grief passes with them. They will never get tired of hearing me cry.
For people who are listening, because I think it's so funny you talk about running out of grief passes, because I think there's moments. I was just talking to some friends. By the time everybody hears this, I will have already been to Dallas and back. But Bryant and I, this Thursday, fly out to Dallas, and now it's my turn to cry. But I haven't been to Texas since my brother's funeral. And we're going out for a really fun, awesome reason, but I'm sick to my stomach about it. Yeah. And with Bryant not having really a lot of context, he's trying to understand. And he's like, thank you for telling me. But for him, it's like he can't. Places, dates, those sorts of things, those aren't as heavy on him, but for me, every date, every place, that's just a reminder. So I am really struggling flying out there. And I was just talking to 2 friends here at the church, and I was like, is that weird? And the fact that I would even need to ask that, I think we've got to create more space for people to be sad, to feel their grief. And they were so gracious. They were like, of course, that's normal. Feel it, But I get embarrassed sometimes when I'm having a day where I'm missing Eric, or when I'm having a moment where I'm triggered, or I feel bad about that grief because I'm like, it's been 4 years. Shouldn't I be over it by now? Or it's been 5 years. Shouldn't I be moving past this? Shouldn't it?
Right.
And it gets the grief, the present, I love how you describe it as a friend you didn't ask for. I think, that initial year and a half, that friend didn't leave my side. I think as the years keep going, the friend is there, but they might be like lurking in the corner. And then there'll be random times where they the friend runs right up and he's right next to me, and it's like, oh.
Yeah.
How can we help people create space for people to grieve? How can we help people learn? Because it's so funny. I'll tell people all the time, please ask me about my brother. Let me talk about it and not be weird. Let me make a really dark joke and you not get awkward about it. Let me, but people don't do that. And I'm like, I don't know how to help. And so when I know someone has passed, I have a really good friend. Her husband died he got sick in October, passed away a couple days before Christmas. And we hang out. Our sons are friends. She's done my hair for galas. And I remember this one time she was doing my hair for this gala, and I just started asking her all about her husband. And she burst into tears, and she's sobbing while she's doing my hair. But in the sob, she said, thank you so much for letting me talk about him. Nobody lets me talk about him.
Right.
And it's because people feel, they feel awkward. They feel bad, So how can we help people learn how to create grief passes?
I'm not the expert because I'm still in it. But from what I've experienced in the last year and a half, I would say the only thing I would say is just, don't tell me how to do it. Because you're not me and there's no other Chris, my brother Chris. I mean, there is one Heather Michelle Funk Palacios in humanity, and there is one Christopher Kelsey Funk in humanity. So how can anybody else in humanity tell me how to grieve that one in humanity that's no longer here? It's impossible. And with all due respect, none of you know what it's like. So how are any of you telling me the one thing, Nicole, that people have told me repeatedly is stop posting about it?
Wow. People are saying that to you.
Yeah. Stop posting about it. But I want to post about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to post about it. And I stopped for a while because I'm a people pleaser and people are telling me to stop posting about it. But, you know, I would just don't tell people how to grieve. You're not them and you're not the person that they lost.
Yeah.
And you never will be.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes, like, I post about it too, and I think dying by suicide is so different than dying by any other form of death. My brother passed away January 4th, 2019. My mother-in-law passed away from Alzheimer's September 5th of 2019. And the way I grieved Eric was so different than the way I grieved Linda.
Very
right?
different. And people ask me why. They're like, why is suicide different? And I'm like, I'll tell you why. It's because suicide leaves hundreds, if not thousands, of
questions,
victims in its wake. When my grandpa died of Alzheimer's, my grandpa was the victim.
Yes. That's so,
When my brother killed himself, he's not suffering anymore. He's not the victim, but he left a lot of victims in his wake. Left a lot of victims behind.
It's so funny because you're the only other person I've heard. I remember a couple of days after Eric passed, I was on my back porch sobbing. And I kept saying, like, Eric's the victim. You know, I was so distraught for Eric. And Bryant was like, baby, you've got to stop. Eric's not the victim. You are. Like, you need to feel this grief for yourself. And then I think then that went into anger of like, because Eric was a Jesus follower. So then it's like, then I was like pissed. Yeah. Well, you know, and honestly, Heather, if I could just be honest for a second, because I feel like that's what we need to do. Like, I wasn't happy that he was in heaven, to be quite frank.
Right.
I was like, quite frankly, he should be in hell, you know? Like, and I really believe he's in heaven. And I've gotten to the place now where, I'm glad he's there, but also still real pissed off. So, like, when my mother-in-law passed away, the couple of days before I was like, can you please find him and punch him in the face? You know, like, when you get up there, let that be your first thing, you know? Run past Jesus real quick, punch Eric, run back. But, you know, and
I felt like, you know, I was very, very mad because I was like, what the heck? I mean, I have been fighting tooth and nail to stay alive since I was 8. Why do you get to go to heaven and not have to struggle anymore?
Yeah.
I have been waiting patiently to get there.
Yeah.
I have wanted to die. I have fought that temptation, but I'm still here, stuck here, and you get to go. And I was ticked.
Yeah.
I was ticked.
When I think,
but you know, like in the book of Job, it says that the Lord has numbered the length of our days, and my length of days are longer. When I read that, I was, again, if I can find it in the Bible, it shuts me up.
I love that, and I think, for me, I've had to be comfortable in wow, this is heavy, this is dark, this doesn't make sense. Like, could God have stepped in? He could have. And I don't know. I remember God had given me a vision of Eric's last few hours. And in that vision, Jesus was with him the entire time, you know. And I was so thankful for that. I know that Jesus does not always do that for everyone, but I was really thankful. And I had asked I knew theologically, you know, Eric had accepted Christ as his Savior. Suicide doesn't diminish that. He's in heaven. But I also asked, I remember around Eric's funeral, like, God, can you just give me reassurance he's okay, he's safe? Because, I mean, what people have to understand is, like, when you're walking with an addict, it had been years of every night going to bed, not sure he was going to be alive, waking up wanting to make sure he was okay. And so then it was just basically like, okay, Jesus, you got this now. You know, as funny as that sounds. And so God had given me 2 signs, you know, in those few days that Eric was in heaven, and that helped tremendously. But I think there's this this balance of being in your grief, having the questions, experiencing the pain, and then also having the faith, knowing Jesus has entered into that pain. And neither one of them cancel the other out. They're both the same at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's difficult for people to handle is like you can feel the grief, the doubt, the pain. You can also have the faith and the trust. And I think, too, one of the things I really had to lean on during that season was letting other people have faith for me of like, hey, right now I'm struggling. I need to know that you still believe and that you're going to keep lifting up, you know, that those verses in the Old Testament where Moses lifted up his arms during the battle. Yeah. His hands got tired. People had to lift up his arms. And so there were people in my corner where I was like, I need you to lift up my arms. Like, I can't do it right now. Yeah. And so and I know you have people in your corner that do that for you.
Yeah. But it's so weird because you're just like, I just keep telling myself I'll just run out of these grief passes with everybody. So now I'm afraid to go to people, but I'm trying to figure it out. You know, it's so weird. You know, I do read the Bible now through the lens of grief, which I've never done that before. I've always read the lens of suicide, but you know, I look at David, you know, when his child died, I've read that a lot. Mm-hmm. I've read, you know, I'll tell you what's been enlightening, Nicole, is I've always read Job. People think I'm weird because they're like, why did you read Job? Well, because I read Job because nobody had it worse and he didn't take his life.
And his wife told him to, remember? In the very beginning, his wife said, why don't you just curse God and die?
Curse God and die. So I've always drawn strength from Job because I've never had it that bad. So if he didn't give up, I can't give up. That being said, in the last year and a half, we've always villainized Job's wife because she's like, curse God and die. You know, she lost her children.
Yeah, she did. Yep.
For a mother to lose all your children, that's gonna wreck you. Mm-hmm. And it's given me like this newfound compassion for Job's wife that for the last 42 years of my life, you know, I never had. And which now that I've been able to birth this new biblical compassion for a biblical person, I'll carry that with me forever in my heart. And it's a compassion that I think will manifest in other people's lives when they need compassion.
I love that. And I think, you know, it's always funny because we fast forward to the end. Well, God gave it all back. Yeah, he gave it in new way. He didn't get his original 7 kids back. He got 7 new kids. He didn't get you know, there's always going to be that loss.
No.
There's always going to be.
There's only one Eric. Mm-hmm. There's only one Chris.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I still have 2 other brothers. They're not Chris.
Yeah.
So, but it does. It's interesting how, but my anchor is honestly the Bible. That's great. You know what else has spoke to me? And you'll relate to this, Nicole, is how upset Martha and Mary, you know, they're like, you could have saved our brother.
Yeah.
You could have saved him. I mean, I love their desperate frustration.
Yes. Well, anger, honestly.
And anger with Jesus.
Yeah.
And that has been so liberating for me.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's exactly, and I would encourage you guys to go back and listen to the message that Bryant preached on May 5th. You can find it on our podcast. But that was exactly what Bryant said was like, he said we often try to like gloss over these biblical characters, but these women had like legit anger. And then he brought out, it's like almost like to pour salt in the wound, but I'm so glad he did this. He brought out how like Jesus healed people from like cities away, right? Or healed people by accident. The lady who accidentally touched his robe and they get healed. Right. And Martha and Mary had seen all of that, and yet he waits 4 days. And then by the time he gets there, you know, he waits a little bit more. But it's interesting because Bryant brought this out, and if you read it in the Message version of the Bible, I always read, you know, Jesus wept, he was filled with compassion, blah, blah, blah. But the Greek word is actually that he was filled with anger. That Jesus was filled with anger about the fact that the world is not supposed to be like this. There's not supposed to be death. There's not supposed to be brokenness. And so when you go back and look at those verses in John 11, it actually says 2 different times that Jesus welled up with anger about, yes, read it in the message, about what he was facing and what these ladies had to walk through. And I think for those of us who are, I think sometimes when we're walking through grief or loss, we think Jesus is kind of aloof and like, oh, it's okay, you're just human, you'll get through. But Jesus enters into that anger with us. And so what I would say to people who are grieving, who are angry, is don't isolate Jesus in your anger. Let him enter into that anger with you. Be mad together. Like, it's not supposed to be this way. The world is not supposed to be broken.
So good.
And one day he will put it back together, not in our timing, but sit in that anger. Don't rush that anger. Try to surrender in that anger. And even if all you do is write or pray angry prayers, write and pray them. Write and pray them. Don't cut off, because there's power in that prayer. There's power in Scripture. Don't cut yourself off from the one person that's going to be able to hold you together through this. Yeah. So
that's good.
Heather, thank you so much for your honesty. It's so refreshing. You are one of my favorite people in the world, and Heather and I'll text randomly, and we'll just send weird memes and GIFs and stuff, because, like, why not?
Well,
you know?
I mean, I just feel very, it's just very bittersweet to have you in my life, because I know that nobody gets it like you do. Yeah. But I hate it that you get it.
Right? I know. It's like, I'm glad you get it, but I hate that you get it, but at least we're not alone. You know, misery does love company. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Well, make sure you guys follow her on social media. It's Wondherful, but like Wondherful.com. .com or .org, Heather? .com. On all socials. We'll tag her in all this, but I really appreciate it, Heather. You are the best. Mwah.
You too.
Much
Thanks
love.
for everything.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Heather.